I never imagined that an ordinary day at work could change the way I looked at myself and the choices I made. The office had always been a space where I tried to keep things professional, where I stayed focused on my tasks and avoided unnecessary drama. Yet, behind every closed door and every polite smile, there were dynamics I had chosen to ignore. My boss, in particular, had a certain presence. He wasn't just a leader. He had this aura of authority mixed with charm that made people listen, made people want to please him. I noticed it, even when I didn't want to admit it. Sometimes the way his eyes lingered a little longer when I spoke, or the compliments that seemed just a bit too personal for the workplace, left me both uneasy and strangely intrigued. That evening, when he casually mentioned that I should come over to his house after work, I felt my heart skip a beat. There was nothing in his tone that suggested it was optional. It was phrased like an invitation, but it carried the weight of a command. I hesitated, trying to find a polite way out, but he was insistent. "It's nothing serious," he said, smiling in that way that seemed to soften his authority. "Just a little gathering. You'll enjoy yourself." Against my better judgment, I agreed. The entire way there, I couldn't shake off the nerves. My thoughts kept running wild, weaving stories of what might happen, even though I told myself I was overthinking. When I finally arrived, the house itself was intimidating. It wasn't just a home. It was a statement of wealth and influence. The tall gates opened silently, as though welcoming me into another world. I stepped inside, greeted by soft lighting, polished floors, and the faint hum of music playing in the background. He greeted me warmly, almost too warmly, and led me further inside. I expected to see just him, maybe a quiet evening. But as we entered the living room, I saw his friends already there, lounging on expensive couches, glasses in their hands, their laughter filling the space. They looked at me with curiosity, with a kind of unspoken recognition, as though they already knew why I was there. I sat down nervously, feeling out of place, but my boss made sure to keep me close. He introduced me with a smile, and his friends greeted me politely, though their eyes carried a weight that words could not. At first, everything seemed harmless. Drinks were poured, small talk filled the air, and I tried to convince myself that it really was just a gathering, nothing more. Yet beneath the surface, I felt the tension building. Every now and then, one of the friends would glance at me a little too long, or their laughter would seem tinged with something unspoken. I tried to laugh along, to act natural, but the weight of their attention pressed heavily on me. My boss, sensing my unease, leaned closer and whispered reassurances, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "Relax," he said. "You're safe here." Yet the way his hand brushed against mine as he spoke told me that safety wasn't what he meant. The longer I stayed, the more the atmosphere shifted. The conversation slowed, the music seemed louder, and the air grew heavy with anticipation. It was as if the entire evening had been leading to something unspoken, something I wasn't ready to face. I found myself wondering why I hadn't just said no from the start. But now I was here, in the middle of a game I didn't fully understand. One of his friends moved closer, offering me another drink, his smile just a little too knowing. I took it, my hand trembling slightly, and he lingered for a moment before returning to his seat. My boss watched it all, not with anger or discomfort, but with a kind of silent approval, as though everything was unfolding exactly as he intended. I felt the room closing in on me. My thoughts tangled between fear, curiosity, and something darker I didn't want to name. I told myself I should leave, that I had no business being there, but my body didn't move. Instead, I sat frozen, caught between what was right and what was already happening. The laughter around me grew softer, the look sharper, and in that moment, I knew the night was only beginning. The hours blurred into one another as I sat there, caught in the strange rhythm of their company. Every laugh, every passing glance, seemed to be laced with something more than what was spoken aloud. My boss sat beside me, his arm resting on the back of the couch in a way that made it feel like I was boxed in, claimed without a word. His friends watched me with expressions I couldn't fully decipher, half amusement, half hunger, and it made my skin prickle with both fear and anticipation. At some point, the music softened, leaving behind a hush that made the silence between words louder. One of the friends leaned forward, his gaze fixed on me as if he wanted to peel back every layer of hesitation I carried. He asked simple questions, where I was from, what I liked to do outside of work, but the way he looked at me made it impossible to answer without feeling like my responses were being weighed for some hidden purpose. I could sense the shift. The small talk was just a mask, and behind it was something I wasn't sure I was ready for. My boss poured another drink for me, his hand brushing mine as he handed me the glass. This time, he didn't pull back immediately. His fingers lingered, curling lightly against my skin. I froze, every nerve in my body on edge, but I didn't pull away. A quiet voice inside me whispered that this was dangerous, that I was stepping into a place I couldn't easily return from. And yet, another voice, softer, but somehow louder, told me that maybe I wanted this, that maybe the thrill was worth the risk. The conversation in the room dipped again, and I became acutely aware of how the men were looking at me. It was no longer subtle, no longer masked by politeness. Their stares were direct, deliberate, like a game had started, and I was the prize at the center. My boss leaned in closer, his breath warm against my ear as he murmured, "You don't need to be nervous. Just let yourself go." The words settled into me, weaving through the guilt and uncertainty until they sparked something reckless. I took a sip of the drink, letting the warmth slide down my throat, and when I set the glass down, I realized I was trembling, not from fear alone, but from the weight of anticipation pressing against me. One of his friends stood, slowly circling the room until he was standing in front of me. He held out his hand, as if offering to help me up. I glanced at my boss, searching for a sign of disapproval, but instead he nodded faintly, his lips curling into something between encouragement and command. Against every warning bell in my head, I placed my hand in the friend's. The moment he pulled me up, the atmosphere shifted entirely. The laughter faded. The room felt smaller, the air denser. My pulse raced in my chest, and for a second, I thought I might step back, reclaim my boundaries, walk out the door. But I didn't. I stood there, caught between two choices, and the weight of their eyes made my decision for me. What happened next didn't feel like a sudden break, but more like a slow unraveling. My boss's friend guided me gently, his touch deliberate yet patient, as though he already knew I would surrender eventually. My boss remained seated, watching with quiet intensity, his approval granting permission for what was unfolding. The others leaned back, their silence heavy, waiting for their turn in whatever strange ritual this was becoming. My thoughts scattered in every direction, images of my life outside this house, of the people who trusted me, of the promises I had made. And yet, beneath all that noise was a raw, undeniable current pulling me forward. The room seemed to dissolve until all I could feel was the heat of their presence and the pounding of my own heart. I told myself this was only a moment, that I could pretend later it had never happened, that no one needed to know. That life felt fragile, but it was the only thing that kept me from collapsing under the weight of what I was doing. My boss's eyes met mine one last time before I let go of hesitation completely. In them, I saw no judgment, no hesitation, only expectation, only desire. By the time I realized there was no turning back, the line had already been crossed. What began as an innocent invitation had become something else entirely, and I was no longer just a guest in my boss's home. I was part of a secret, a game, a betrayal I couldn't undo. The night stretched out before me, long and uncertain, and deep down I knew I had stepped into a darkness that would follow me long after the lights in that house went dim. When I finally left that house, the night air felt heavy against my skin, almost as if it carried the weight of everything that had just happened. I walked quickly, my mind racing, my body still trembling from the intensity of it all. Each step I took away from that door should have felt like freedom, but instead it felt like I was dragging chains behind me. The images replayed in my mind with brutal clarity, the way they looked at me, the way I had let myself give in, the way my boss's approval had sealed every decision I made. I wanted to push it all out, to convince myself it was just a bad dream, but my body refused to forget. At home, The silence was suffocating. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the floor, waiting for the guilt to fade. It didn't. Instead, it seeped deeper, winding its way into every thought, every corner of my conscience. I wanted to shower, to wash away the night, but even when the water ran hot against my skin, the memories clung stubbornly, reminding me that some stains don't come off so easily. The next morning, I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the person staring back. There was a faint shadow beneath my eyes, a dullness in the way I carried myself. I kept telling myself it was only once, that no one would ever find out, but the voice inside me didn't buy it. It whispered reminders of what I had done, warnings of what it meant. Back at the office, everything seemed normal on the surface. Colleagues greeted me with the same polite smiles, oblivious to the storm inside me. My boss carried himself as if nothing had happened, his voice steady, his expression calm. But every time our eyes met, there was something unspoken between us, something that tightened my chest and made me look away too quickly. He didn't need to say anything, his silence said enough. He knew I would remember, that I would carry it with me whether I wanted to or not. The worst part wasn't his presence, though. It was the way his friends acted. One of them passed by the office a few days later, stopping by under the pretense of a casual visit. He smiled at me in a way that made my skin crawl, as if the memory of that night was an inside joke only we shared. Another one sent a short message to my phone, nothing explicit, just a few words. Had a great time. My heart sank as soon as I read it. I didn't even remember giving him my number. Each reminder pulled me back into the night I was trying so hard to escape. I became quieter at work, more withdrawn, but that only seemed to amuse them. The more I tried to hide, the more visible my guilt seemed to become. It wasn't just about what happened in that house. It was about the secret that followed me everywhere, pressing against me like a weight I couldn't shake off. At home, things weren't better. My partner noticed the distance, the way I avoided his eyes, the way I hesitated when he reached for me. I told him I was just tired, that work was stressful, but my lies were fragile, and I could see his suspicion growing with each passing day. I hated myself for it, hated the way I was tearing apart something good for the sake of one night that I couldn't even fully understand. And yet, as much as I wanted to bury it, there was a part of me that couldn't. Some nights, when I lay awake staring at the ceiling, I felt the same rush I had felt in that house, the same reckless thrill of giving in. It twisted the guilt into something more complicated, something I couldn't explain even to myself. Was I disgusted? Yes. Was I ashamed? Absolutely. But was there also a part of me that wanted it again? That was the question I couldn't bring myself to answer honestly. The longer I tried to carry the secret, the heavier it became. Days turned into weeks, and with each one, the weight of what I had done pressed harder on my chest. I found myself staring at people differently, wondering if they could see through me, if they could sense the betrayal that lived in my silence. Every conversation with my partner became a test of endurance, every shared moment a reminder of what I had destroyed. He didn't know the truth, not yet, but his eyes were beginning to search mine with questions I wasn't ready to answer. Work was no refuge either. My boss treated me as if nothing had changed, but there was an invisible tether between us now, a connection forged in secrecy. Sometimes he would pass by my desk and let his hand brush against mine, so casually that no one else would notice. It was enough to send a chill down my spine, not from desire but from the reminder that he had a piece of me I couldn't reclaim. His friends, too, hovered on the edges of my life, shadows that reminded me constantly of that night. Their smirks, their casual remarks, all felt like invisible chains pulling me back into the same darkness I wanted so badly to escape. One evening, as I sat alone in my car outside my apartment, I felt the full weight of it all crash over me. I had thought I could compartmentalize, lock the memory away in a corner of my mind, but it was seeping into every part of my existence. I was quieter at home, more distant at work, and constantly on edge. The guilt was corrosive, eating away at me little by little, until I wasn't sure who I was anymore. And yet, beneath the shame, there was still that dangerous spark, the echo of temptation. It frightened me to realize how much I craved something that had nearly destroyed me. The line between love and lust, between control and surrender, had blurred so much that I no longer knew which side of it I stood on. I wondered if that was their intention all along, to trap me in a cycle of regret and craving, to leave me powerless against my own desires. The breaking point came one night when my partner confronted me. His voice was quiet, but his eyes carried the weight of suspicion that had been growing for weeks. "You're not the same," he said simply. "You're here, but you're not with me anymore. What's going on?" I opened my mouth to answer, but no words came. Every excuse I thought of sounded hollow, even in my own head. I felt my throat tighten, tears burning behind my eyes, but still, I couldn't bring myself to confess. The truth would destroy him, destroy us, and I couldn't bear to watch that happen. Instead, I offered him another lie, something about work stress, about needing space. He didn't believe me. I could see it in his eyes, but he let it go for the moment. That look of quiet resignation was worse than anger. It was the look of someone already preparing for disappointment. I realized then that even without knowing the details, he could feel the fracture in our bond, and it was only a matter of time before it split wide open. After that night, I started avoiding both my partner and my boss. I threw myself into meaningless tasks, tried to lose myself in routine, anything to drown out the noise in my head. But the silence of my own thoughts was louder than ever. I would lie awake at night, staring into the darkness, replaying the choices that had brought me here. I wondered how a single evening, a single reckless decision, could ripple out and consume an entire life. Eventually, the invitation stopped. My boss and his friends seemed to lose interest, their attention drifting elsewhere. But the damage had already been done. I was left alone with my memories, with the crushing realization that I had been nothing more than a temporary amusement. The thoughts stung deeper than I expected, not because I wanted them, but because it forced me to confront how easily I had given myself away. In the quiet that followed, I began to understand the true cost of what I had done. Infidelity isn't just about the act, it's about the way it changes you, the way it lingers like a shadow that refuses to leave. It steals trust, corrodes love, and leaves behind a version of yourself you barely recognize. I had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, and no amount of denial could erase it. As I looked back on everything, I realized there was no grand romance in what happened, no love story hidden beneath the secrecy. It was a moment of weakness, a surrender to temptation that left nothing but scars. And though I told myself I would never make the same mistake again, I knew the memory would follow me, whispering in the dark, reminding me of the night I let desire silence every voice of reason. I walked away with nothing but lessons etched into my conscience, lessons about choices, about betrayal, about the fragile line between temptation and destruction. And as much as I longed to forget, I knew that some stories don't fade. They linger, a permanent reminder of the night everything changed.